All right, welcome and good morning, fellow stackers, stack vesters, stack preppers, stack collectors, and stacketicians. I hope you're starting off this weekend just right. This is Expat Stacker coming to you all the way from South Korea. That was Bounce to the Ounce by Zappin' Rogers. And we're going to be talking about the price per ounce as well as a lot of other things today. I'm going to be bringing something new to you on my channel with this weekly segment that I'm calling the Weekly Restack. And basically what I'll be doing is just summarizing and reviewing the news of the past week. And I'm going to be doing that in segments. So here's how the format will go in each segment. So first, we'll just do a quick market recap of basically what went on in the financial markets, where the prices of the metals closed, and just other market related numbers and data. It should take only about 5 minutes or less, and then we'll move into bullion related news, or news that will, does, or could be related to what we do as stackers. I'll mainly be focusing on news that's related to gold, silver, and platinum, but once in a while, other metals like copper, palladium, etc. might make it into the segment if something significant happens. And then after that, we'll move on to world news and current events. I'm not going to try to cover everything that happens in this, but I will listen to your feedback. So if there's something that I missed that you think I should talk about, or that you want me to talk about or focus on in the next week or something like that, go ahead and leave it in the comments section. And last but not least, I'm going to be talking about news from our community here on YouTube. Let me know what you think about this new segment. I am aiming to have the show be anywhere from 20 to 45 minutes, but we'll see. Sometimes there's a slow news week, sometimes there's a lot of news. Feel free to leave your thoughts, comments, feedback, questions, and suggestions in the comments section. So without further ado, let's get into this past week's news. So let's go to the markets. Gold closed the week at $1,827.64 an ounce. So it's dipped about $30 this week, and it's down about $140 from its 2021 high so far this year, where it flirted with the 1960 handle. Silver closed the week at $24.73 an ounce, also slightly lower than it started this week off, and also off its 2021 high, just shy of $28 an ounce. Platinum, which has been on a tear since Q4 2020, followed silver and gold slightly down this week, finishing off at $10.68. And it's also off its 2021 high of nearly $1,130 an ounce. In other commodities, oil dropped almost 3% to end this week. Bitcoin is around $36,000, and it's higher than it started the year, but it's off its nearly $42,000 high in the middle of last week. The Dow, S&P 500, and Nasdaq all finished the week down between 0.5% and 1%, but they're all still in nearly record high territory. Asia Pacific markets were mixed, but the Kospi, where I'm at, which has been surging to start the year, saw a pullback of nearly 2%. But most of the markets here in Asia are also up on the year and also in record high territory in several of the markets, including the Kospi. And the US dollar gained against the euro, the sterling, and remained steady against some of the other currencies like the yen. It seems to me that investors seem to be waiting. They're in wait and see mode, and they're kind of holding their breath for a massive sea change in Washington, D.C. There's a lot of tension right now, obviously, but there is a big change about to happen, and people are still reeling from the civil unrest that occurred in the previous week at the U.S. Capitol. as well as continuing uncertainties over the global pandemic and uncertainties over the vaccine rollout. It's not going quite as smoothly as many governments had hoped. So now let's go ahead and take a look at some precious metal related news. Biden has proposed nearly a $1.9 trillion stimulus package. And I can tell you that because I participated in a digital town hall recently with my congressional representative, who is a long-standing and serving and highly connected Democrat who has direct channels to the Biden administration. He assured everybody who was participating in that digital town hall that they plan to be very aggressive with how they lay out the legislation and policy initiatives. And that includes obviously stimulus, infrastructure, and other things. And this is going to add to the nearly $28 trillion in the U.S.'s national debt. $8 trillion of that was incurred under the Trump administration. And recently, the Fed chairman, Chairman Powell, noted that the U.S.'s current rate of our national our debt is unsustainable because it is growing at a faster pace than our GDP. But he also said that that's okay, which doesn't make sense, but that's what he said. The IMF has called on central banks around the world to restructure monetary policy, laws, rules, procedures, institutions to make it so that central banks of each country can issue direct payments of a central bank-backed digital currency, a CBDC. You can see this from IMF Twitter feed as well as various financial news outlets around the world. The current laws in most countries, 61% of them to be exact, only allow the central banks in those countries to issue banknotes and coins as direct payment to its citizens. In another 16% of countries, the law is not clear, and that could create several problems. So as you can see, it's a big, huge majority of the countries around the world don't have the institutional, legal, or procedural policies in place or laws in place in order to issue central bank-backed digital currencies directly to its citizens. So the IMF is calling on that change to occur. So depending on what country you're in, you might want to look into that. There are only 40 central banks around the world that currently have the authorization to issue direct payments of a CBDC directly to its citizens. So this is a situation that we need to monitor going forward. We also learned this week that the physical delivery of gold and silver from the COMEX in 2020 was at all-time highs, and not by a little bit. It was by a lot. And we are going to continue to monitor this. They also expanded their good delivery list to open and widen the supply of what could be considered acceptable for physical delivery. But it was still at record highs. So this is also something that we want to monitor. I don't see this as being reflected in the current, at least this news coming out now. I don't see it reflected in the current spot price. But as I said, I think investors are in wait and see mode. So we'll see how that goes. But that's definitely something to note. Last year, most of the demand was coming from American and Western investors, but in years prior to that, Chinese, Russian, and other countries, sovereign investors were importing gold. Swiss gold exports were also at all-time highs in 2020. So definitely something to monitor, because that would obviously affect the price of the metals. We've seen a lot of news on the industrial sectors, which are good for precious metals with industrial applications such as platinum and silver, and even to a lesser extent, gold. There are areas in particular that I'm looking out for. The first one is nanochips. Chip makers like SK Hynix, Samsung Electronics, Nvidia, TSMC, Qualcomm, and several others are expected to see a boom in this year's chip demand, and it is expected to surge. This could potentially be good news for gold and silver, although we need to pay attention on that front because there are developments with applications of graphene that could affect silver. Also, the gold application, I mean, it's in nanochips, so it's also nano gold. However, the more the demand, then that could affect the price. So I'm paying attention to that area. The other thing is that nanochips affect machines which also use precious metals. So if there's an increase in demand in nanochips, there could be an increase in those other machines that require precious metals. Number 2 is robotics. Samsung Electronics is working on robots which can do more than just clean your floor in your house. They have unveiled a robot which can pour wine, load the dishwasher, and do many other chores around the house. Hyundai Motors also recently acquired robotics firm Boston Dynamics, as they are moving towards becoming more of a mobility company rather than just an automobile company. And speaking of automobiles, the global electric vehicle market was valued around $162 billion starting in 2019 and is projected to reach over $800 billion by 2027, so within the next 6 years. That is an annual growth rate of over 22%. So shares of Tesla, NIO, CATL, LG Chem, Samsung, SDI, SK Innovation, Panasonic, and other major players in the electric vehicle and battery markets have surged since last year. And recently, you may have heard that Apple and Hyundai Motors announced a partnership to develop an electric vehicle, which sent Hyundai Motors and its affiliate Kia surging in their stock price. Now let's move on to general news and current events. U.S. bank regulators have fined Wells Fargo former general counsel James Struther another $3.5 million for his role in a bank-wide sales scandal. Struther was one of 8 executives charged in the case for a decade-long criminal practice. The total amount of aggregate fines against Wells Fargo for this scandal is now approaching $3 billion. There are several cases against Wells Fargo, and each time there's a ruling, they have to pay more fines. Capital One Financial has been hit with a $290 million penalty after admitting to the U.S. Treasury Department that it willfully violated anti-money laundering requirements between 2008 and 2014. So here we just have 2 more examples of financial institutions and banks willfully admitting that they broke the law, willfully paying the fines, which sound like a lot to you and me, but to them, it's just the cost of doing business. It's literally like buying lemons at a lemonade stand. It's not a loss for them. That's the cost of doing business. $200 million fine is much less than the profits they made for money laundering. All right, now moving on to Health and Human Services. Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar is resigning on January 20th. And in his statement of his resignation letter, there is some cause for confusion, as the statements are in conflict with statements made by the Trump administration regarding the availability and existence of stockpiles of vaccines. Azar also condemned the violence that occurred on the Capitol on January 6th, which is unprecedented for a Health and Human Services secretary, in a letter of resignation. The NRA has filed for bankruptcy and says it plans to reincorporate in Texas as part of an ongoing restructuring process. The NRA's leadership is also under investigation for alleged fraud and embezzlement, which led to misappropriating of over $64 million. January 15th was the last day for stimulus payments before tax season, with some exceptions. If you haven't received a direct payment, this is obviously for the United States, and you're someone that used the tax software Tax Act or Jackson Hewitt software, or you had a prepaid debit card or paper checks for the first stimulus, you may still receive your stimulus checks, as there was an accounting mix-up at the IRS, big surprise, caused by people who fit these categories that I just described: Tax Act software, Jackson Hewitt software, prepaid debit card, or checks, paper checks. So people who were in those categories, they may have had their payments sent out late. So monitor that, because you may still receive those payments. Anyone else who did not receive a stimulus payment yet, as of January 15th, what you're going to need to do is claim a recovery rebate on your 2020 taxes. So if you didn't receive the latest round of stimulus, that's where you can start to look for. Federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies, as well as the National Guard, are being deployed to state capitals around the U.S. as the threat of further political violence has authorities on alert up until the inauguration of Joe Biden as president. North Korea has unveiled a new nuclear missile that is capable of being launched by submarine, which their state media described as, quote, the most powerful in the world. As is often the case with the DPRK, it's difficult to corroborate these claims, to say the least. If in fact it is true that North Korea has developed a nuclear missile that's capable of being launched from a submarine, this would give it a big step towards the 3 necessary deployment systems needed for a nuclear triad, those being land, sea, and air-based deployment systems. The military parade that recently occurred in North Korea and the harsh rhetoric out of Pyongyang comes just days before the Biden inauguration, and it's likely intended to test, prod, and put the ball in the US's court to see how the Kim regime is going to get along with the Biden administration. Due to changes in WhatsApp's privacy terms, social media users who want to use messaging applications that are discreet and encrypted have flocked over to the messaging app Signal, which has caused the platform's servers to crash upon millions and millions of downloads. A new variant of COVID-19 appeared in Japan this week as 4 asymptomatic travelers from Brazil were quarantined after a positive test. The Japanese National Institute of Infectious Disease confirmed this 4th variation of the virus is different than the Wuhan strain, the UK strain, and the South African strain. And being that those travelers came from Brazil, it's at least in Brazil and Japan. The annual JP Morgan Pharmaceutical Conference is currently being held. This year's conference is being held virtually due to the pandemic. Leading South Korea pharma company Celltrion has boycotted this year's conference due to JP Morgan's manipulation of their stock price and the pharmaceutical sector as a whole. And this occurred at the same time JP Morgan was caught manipulating the US bond market and the silver market, but only had to pay a fine as a result. So once again, the cost of doing business for the banks. Joe Biden will be sworn into office on Wednesday next week, and Mike Pence allegedly phoned Vice President-elect Kamala Harris to assist with the peaceful transition of power. So that is a recap of some of the biggest headlines around the world. Let's all watch how those markets react to a big week next week. There's one more piece of news that I wanted to discuss, but I'm actually waiting until to see if there's any mention about it in next week's news, which is the revival of TPP. So that's something that I have been reading about, and I did a story on my channel a few weeks back about the RCEP, which is the biggest free trade zone in the world and basically includes all of Asia, Australia, and New Zealand, China, Japan, South Korea, many other countries, basically everyone in Asia except for India. This is a rival to the TPP, and it is going to be a huge boost for the Asian economies, especially China. So I am sure that Joe Biden is going to try to revive the TPP, but we're going to have to see. I think he will be talking about that fairly early on in his presidency, and we'll have to see how other Asian nations react, because this will be a challenge to China. So we'll get to that next week. All right, and so last but not least, we have community news and notes. I would like to say big congratulations to Stacks on the Rise for the successful birth of his baby boy. It was late, but better late than never, and everybody was healthy and happy, so that is the important thing. Pistol Packing Pilot also had a baby recently, so congrats to him. Lucy Stacks, who has been taking the stacking community by storm, has a really great, awesome video where she won the Troy Stacks holiday giveaway. So that was really awesome. We do have Juice Stacker coming up on the Silvercast next week. So there'll be 3 episodes over the next 3 weeks, and the first one's going to be dropping early next week. Very good episode. I'm telling you guys, this is Juice brought the juice. Let me just put it that way. It's going to be something you don't want to miss. And I found a new channel that I wanted to give a shout out to. Currently has probably less than a dozen subscribers. It's just Girl Stacker. That's it. She talks about cryptos, cash, saving money, stacking, stocks, investing, and everything. Really great channel. I like her presentation. I'm hoping she can be consistent with the videos and do a really great job. All right. So that's it for the community news and notes. If there's anything else that you want to share with the community, please leave it in the comment section. As I said, I hope you're all having a wonderful start to your weekend. Leave your thoughts in the comment section, and I'll catch you in next week's Restack. Take care, everybody.